You have another handout that I have, and I'm just going to go over this very, very quickly. I don't even think I'll take 20 minutes. As I mentioned initially in this workshop, I want you to think broadly about measuring the effectiveness of your teaching. Now, if you say, again, that your goal, your objective is to create something, well, how do you measure that? How do you assess students? How do you assess learning? Bill mentioned a very effective way, but incredibly underutilized way of measuring your teaching effectiveness is to measure the change in knowledge, as demonstrated by a pre-test and a post-test. So if you haven't done this, I strongly encourage that you get some version of the final exam, you administer it the first week of class, you tell your students, this doesn't count. Don't worry, don't drop the class. Don't panic. If you get a 10 out of it, that's fine. And then you would administer a similar or maybe even the same version of the test as a final exam. You have some more direct measure of delta, of change. Here's what they knew before you expose them to the treatment condition, teaching. Here's what they know after 15 weeks of being exposed to the treatment condition, teaching. And here's the measure of change. Something like that, it's in of itself doesn't stand alone as a measure of effectiveness, but it helps broaden those teaching evaluations. It also provides wonderful teaching feedback for you and for your students. If you give that final exam the first week of class, and the average score is 70, what could that tell you? They know it already. Maybe you've designed the class, pitched the class too elementary, too basic. Conversely, if they get a 10, the average score is a 10, maybe you've pitched it a little too hard or maybe just right. Depending, you want them, if the entering score was a 70 and the exiting score is a 80, there's been a growth of 10. If you gave them the entering score was a 10 and the exiting score was a 70, a change of 60, right? I did my math correct? All right, good. All right, let's just look at the first, I was dancing until everyone came back. So, here's the Auburn University Evaluation of Teaching Policy. If you haven't read this before, it's direct from the faculty handbook. So make sure you understand what it says. Look on page 2. Look at the very first line in that kind of second paragraph where it says peer evaluations. Read that. What's the next parenthetical phrase? Mandated by the Board of Trustees. Have you had a peer evaluation, peer review this semester? If not, you're violating the mandate of the Board of Trustees. So you need to be aware of what standards you're being held to and figure out how to do these things. Raj.
Just to clarify, the small group instructional feedback does not count as a peer evaluation because we don't evaluate it. We're helping you get feedback from your students. So peer would be some member of your faculty in your department who knows nothing about evaluating teaching coming to be your teacher.
I would disagree a little bit with Raj. I would say in of itself it is not sufficient, but as part of a peer review process that involves your colleagues, your department chair, and some external observers like us, that could be that small group instructional feedback, I think, has a legitimate place, but not as an only part. I have 5 copies of a book chapter that Dr. Imad, Dr. Buskus, and I have recently written for an electronic book, Division 2, the Teaching of Psychology.
Yeah, Society for the Teaching of Psychology.
Society for the Teaching. It's on peer review of teaching. So I just have 5 of these copies. You're welcome to take them. It has a URL. The book, it's not in, I just checked yesterday, so it's still not, it's not posted yet, but it will be posted here, so I'll just leave these here if you want.
That's going to be full text, free, available?
Yeah, go on the website, there's a huge ebook list there. Check the one you want, you can download it either the whole book or check it right now.
Oh, wow.
It's pretty cool.
Oh, okay, good.
Yeah, these are the only free copies you get. So. Turn to page 3 in this handout. And what you have here is something that I have called Planning for Evaluation Flowchart. There are 5 rectangular boxes. And what I'm proposing here is that when you're thinking of evaluation of teaching, there are 5 general questions to ask yourself. What is the purpose of the evaluation? Who will do it? When will it be done? What will be evaluated? And how will you evaluate it? The first basic question is, what is the purpose? And I propose that there are 3 basic purposes for the evaluation of teaching. One is to collect some data for personnel decisions. One is to improve yourself, and one is for data for research. You can do some research using end of the semester evaluation, scholarship of teaching and learning research. Who will do it? I propose that there is a place for multiple people to be involved. You can collect data from yourself about what you feel, your beliefs, this teaching behavior checklist. You can do a self-review of your material, your teaching. Collect data from students, from colleagues, from administrators, deans, department chairs, from past people who have taken your class in the past, and from someone like the Biggio Center. So think broadly about where you're getting the data from. When will it be done? I suggest to you that there are multiple stages: before, during, and after your teaching. The kinds of data you collect is a little different at each of those stages. So you get a sense of a little different than just collecting a one-time snapshot of your end of the semester student evaluations. What will be evaluated? So not only how students experience your class, but here are some suggested, I think, legitimate subjects for you to evaluate. How well is the course organized? If you ask students what they like or dislike, they often comment on organization. Course is well organized. Does the material start in an elementary way and build up? Are the units sequential? Often we fall into kind of a mistake of convenience as instructors. The mistake of convenience is we organize our class based on how the textbook presents the material. And I don't know if you've looked at your textbooks recently, but I've noticed that most textbooks are written between 15 and 20 chapters. Why is that? Well, there are 15, 16 weeks in a semester. And so we tend to just follow how the textbook author has organized our class. Maybe that's not the way we want to do it. So think about how your class is organized. Assess that. How can you assess that? The subject matter and the material. Can you evaluate whether what you are teaching is really what's important for students to learn? How do you collect that information? Maybe you survey in the industry or the people who are teaching the follow-on class. What do students who are now taking my class and coming to your class, what do they need to know? Do you have accreditation criteria, ABET or whatever? Is there information that has to be taught? So assess your course that way. Communication skills. You know, what is teaching? Teaching is communicating, verbally and non-verbally. You know, how do I assess what I do? Am I aware of my physical and verbal behaviors and how that influences student responses? Do I make eye contact? Do I intimidate? I have power. Do I distribute that power equitably and fairly? Do I have kind of unknown biases? When I ask a question, do I just call on the male students in the class? There was some research. I haven't seen recent research about this, but there was research that college professors, even female college professors, call on male students inequitably, at a higher percent, at a disproportionate percent. So, communication skills. Do I sit there and mumble? Or do I do the math teacher, the stereotypic and unjustified, by the way, math teacher syndrome of the chalk in one hand, the eraser in the other, and I sit there and I have this love affair with the board and I forget that there are students there? Or do I do my PowerPoint and I sit behind the computer? Or even worse, do I turn my back to my students and I just read my PowerPoint slides verbatim? All of that can be evaluated. There are communication checklists. There are things available for you. So if in your teaching philosophy statement, you say it's important, an objective, a goal to establish rapport, well, how do you establish rapport, and can you measure that? Can you collect some data on that? Knowledge of the subject. This is a tentative. I always feel uneasy about this when this is included on an evaluation form. I think the question is important, but it doesn't capture, it's not worded in the right way for me. I've never found the good way to ask an undergraduate student to assess my knowledge of the subject matter. It just never quite seems to be appropriate. Who the hell are they to measure my knowledge? So it's not knowledge of the subject matter, it's my ability to communicate that subject matter that really is the critical issue. Enthusiasm. Are we enthusiastic and excited and energetic? Do I bring that to the classroom? Concern for students. Caring. Competence. Clarity. There's 5 C's. I always talk about these 5 C's. Memory. If you ask students, and I think Bill's research with the teaching behavior checklist, faculty tend to focus on the knowledge component. They prize that as really the most important element in good teaching, whereas students are looking for a relationship. They want to know that teachers care about them. Am I summarizing that correctly? So how do you measure that? Can you get some feedback on concern? Fairness and equitably. This can get to the point of designing good tests. Do I design good assessments, reliable and valid assessments of knowledge? But also, do I distribute my power fairly and equitably? Do I call on students? Do I move around? There's research that shows where students sit in the classroom correlates to the kinds of grades they get. Do you know that? Students who sit in the front and in the middle, it's kind of what I call magic T, tend to get higher grades. Now remember, correlation is not causality, right? Maybe because the smarter students just naturally go there because they know, but it may mean they get higher grades because they can hear better, they're less distracted. My son, when he was a student, taking his intro to chemistry class with 700 students in a large lecture hall, I asked him after the first week of class, how's class? He said, oh, it's really big. But you know what, Dad? I sit in the front row. And I don't know that there's 650 students behind me because all I can see is a professor. I said, oh, wow. Take after your mother. Smart. Reliability and validity of tests. The use of appropriate teaching methods. There are lots of different ways of teaching. Lecture is one way of teaching. And sometimes lecture is the most appropriate and effective way of teaching. But maybe sometimes it's not. So are you using the right teaching method to go along with your learning objectives? And then finally, can you measure changes in student outcomes, student learning? And what follows in this handout are some examples of different ways of doing each of those things. So there's, on page 4, kind of a self-evaluation checklist for you to go through. It even looks at evaluating the teaching syllabus, the material. You know, we submit our papers, our research, for peer review. How many of us submit our teaching syllabus for peer review? Why can't we identify half a dozen colleagues who teach a similar class at other universities, send them email, say, would you mind just spend an hour, look at my syllabus, give them a checklist, am I teaching the right stuff? Do you know of other materials, other resources? Send me back some feedback, and I'll do the same for you.
Have you done that before?
I have never done that.
I like that idea. I like that idea, though. That's good.
I have never done it. All right, so I've been undressed in public. No. 6, page 6. We have the small group instructional feedback process, but there are other ways of getting formative information from your students. This critical classroom incident questionnaires developed by Stephen Brookfield, who Bill mentioned. One of my all-time favorite books, and I would recommend this if you're sitting on the beach and don't want to read the latest thriller novel. It's called Becoming a Critically Reflective Teacher. No on. Becoming a Critically Reflective Teacher, Stephen Brookfield. Excellent, excellent book. And so he poses these 5 or 6 or 7 questions at the end of every class. He teaches graduate class, so once a week he gets students to reflect on what they're learning. He uses that information to inform his teaching. Students collect that data, they use it as a learning portfolio at the end of the class. Just another suggestion. Some peer review of teaching guidelines, the next few pages. Emad collected most of this and put it in that article. So page 9. Go to page 9. You know, we get those end of the semester student evaluations, but often we're not given really any guidance on how to interpret the data, especially the written comments. You know, there's some research that shows that written comments are no better or worse than the numerical scores. And there's actually high correlation between what students say verbally and what they say numerically. Yet we tend to put more credence in the written comments than we do the numerical comments. But they don't tend to negate each other. But here's some suggestions on how do you use those written evaluations. How can you categorize them? Some of you are qualitative researchers. You know how to do this a whole lot better than what I'm suggesting here. But you know, maybe like on page 10, you make a chart of some teaching characteristics that you think are particularly important. Then you try to categorize the written comments to put in to those. You know, so here's just some suggestions on how to do that. And then the last few pages are kind of supplement what's in that binder. Here's how, if I'm developing my academic portfolio, here's how I capture those data. Here's how I capture the teaching data. Again, they're guided questions to get you to think about and to put this into narrative form. You need to capture in two pages at the most all these data from multiple sources and make sense in narrative can be supplemented with charts and tables, but you want to create evidence. Now you do the same thing for outreach, service, and scholarship. So very quickly, I talked at you for 20 minutes. Any questions? All right, let's take a break for lunch. Where is lunch? It's right across the hall. Okay?